This video is aimed at advanced developers and it discusses the use of the A5 underbar XB runGridComponent XBasic function. So what we're showing on the screen right now is a simple UX component. You can see here's a UX component with some static text, and the static text has our label in it, and then we have a freeform container, and inside the freeform container we've got some HTML, and then we've got an A5 code block that executes some XBasic. Now we'll come back and discuss this code block a little bit later on, but when we run this component, what we see is we see the UX component, and then we see an embedded grid component over here. So the first question you might ask yourself is, well, what's special about this? We've always been able to put embedded components inside a UX component, and in fact if we go to this UX component over here, we see that we have a static text control at the top with a label, and then underneath that we have an embedded object that was placed using this control over here. So when we go to working preview, we see our static text control, and then we see the embedded grid component. But if we actually examine what's going on with this component inside Firefox, we can see that when this UX component is run, as soon as the component is run, another callback is triggered to actually run the grid component. So the UX component runs, and then the embedded grid runs on an AJAX callback. But now let's go and take a look at the component that uses the A5 underbar XB runGridComponent function. So let's go now and run this in live preview, and we can see now that the embedded grid is running over here without any AJAX callback. So the whole component renders on the server and then is displayed in the browser with no AJAX callbacks to render the embedded grid. So now let's go back and take a look at the code here. So if we go here and we look at the code in this freeform area here, we see that inside our code block we're calling this function called runGridComponent, which is going to run the grid component obviously on the server, and it passes in a dot variable called p, which defines properties of the grid that we want to run. So you can see here we've set the grid name to be the grid underbar salesperson grid. We've set the alias to be mygrid1, and we specified that the component of the parent alias, which is the UX component that's running this, is just dialog.component name. Then we run the grid, get the output in this variable called xb, and then we just emit xb as we would emit any other text in a code block. So because we did this grid is now rendered on the initial display of the UX component, and so it's being rendered not in any AJAX callback. So the same function can also be used in an AJAX callback. So you can see here that we have a button on this grid, on this UX component, and this button is doing an AJAX callback, and it's calling a function called XB runGrid. So if we go look at the function here, we can see that XB runGrid has a very similar pattern that the code block had. You can see here's our call to the runGridComponent function, and the only difference is that this time we've passed in a div which specifies the ID of the div where the callback should display the resulting grid component. So let's go back now to say working preview, and then you can see here's my div, and when I press the button to do the AJAX callback, you can see there we've displayed the grid in the callback. So this function is not doing on the surface things that couldn't have been done before, but because all of the work is being done on the server side, with the ability of XBasic to dynamically set any of these properties, you have great new functionality. So let's pick this up now in the next video. In the previous video we discussed how the A5XB run grid component function operates, and we showed how the function can be used in an A5W code block as it's being used over here, or in an AJAX callback as it's being used over here. What we'd like to do in this video now is discuss some of the benefits of using the A5XB run grid component function as opposed to just simply using the existing action JavaScript methods for running a grid component on an AJAX callback. So let's go now to another component that we've just defined over here, and if you look at this component you can see that we have a drop-down box, and in the drop-down box we're prompting the user for which grid to run in this div over here. So if I go there and say customers and then click the button to do my AJAX callback, I get to see the customers grid, and then if I go there and now say salespeople, I see the salesperson grid, and then if I do categories, I see the categories grid over there. And this is all done very easily now using this new function in an AJAX callback. So let's go back to the design mode now and look at controls. So you can see the first thing that we have here is a drop-down box, and in this drop-down box the choices have been set to customers, salespeople, and categories. So then we have a button that makes an AJAX callback, and this button is going to call a function called XB run grid. And now let's go and take a look at this XBasic function. So if we look at the function, we can see that since it's a standard AJAX callback, there's the E object passed in, and inside the E object is all of the data submitted from the controls on the component. So e.data submitted .what grid is the current value in that drop down box, and so that's going to be the grid name, and it's going to have a value of either customers, salespeople, or categories. However, we don't actually have a grid called customers. Our grid is actually called grid underbar customers, and we have a grid called grid underbar salespeople and another grid called grid underbar categories. So we need to translate the submitted name into the real grid name. Now there are many ways that you could do that. You could write an if statement in XBasic, but the way that I've chosen to do it is to use an XBasic object called a string dictionary. So a string dictionary basically takes a CRLF delimited list of key values and corresponding return values. So you can see my key value is customers, but my return value is grid customers. So I dimension the string dictionary, and then I initialize it with the CRLF delimited string here, and then I do an sd.get to convert the submitted value into the real value. So now here's where the meat of the function is. So we've got our P object that defines the name of the grid that we want to run, but in this case the name of the grid that we want to run is just this variable, which is going to be equal to either grid customers, grid salespeople, or grid categories. And then we have the standard code that we were setting the properties of this P object that gets passed into the function over here. And the only wrinkle is that you can see that in p.override, which is where we override settings, we're going to say that the style name of the grid that's going to be run on the callback is going to be set to this variable underbar style, and here we're going to say that underbar style is equal to the style name of the parent UX component, and then we're going to just replace underbar style in this string with the current values. So this is going to have now the style name of the UX component that we're currently running. So now let's go back now, and if we click this button initially, there was no grid with a blank name, so we get this error. But now go back there and choose customers, and you can see that we're showing now the customers grid. So using this new function, we've been able to create a highly dynamic AJAX callback function that displays selected grids in the callback. Thanks very much for watching. In this video, we're going to talk about some of the options that you can use when running the A5 underbar XB runGrid function. So you can see here we have a UX component with a button that does an AJAX callback, and in the AJAX callback we're using A5 underbar XB runGrid to run a grid component, and you can see now that the grid is displaying all of the data in the underlying table. So let's go back now and take a look at the XBasic function and see some of the options that we can use in the P variable that is passed in to the function. So currently we're just specifying the grid name, the grid alias, and the div where the grid should be displayed. But let's say we'd like to now go and specify a filter for the grid. So I'm going to go here now and say that I'm going to uncomment this line over here that says that the filter is bill state region equals arg1, or bill state region equals arg2, or bill state region equals arg3, and then I'm going to go and uncomment these lines over here where we actually define the value of the arguments. So if you read this p.argument string here, you can see that the syntax is argument name followed by argument type and then followed by argument value. So we're saying that we'd like to find all records where the state is equal to Massachusetts or California or New York, and then let's also uncomment the p.user order property as well. So we're going to sort the result by state. So now when we go over to run the callback, we can see now that instead of seeing 100 records, we're seeing 33 records, and we're seeing California, Massachusetts, and then if we go to the last record, New York over there. So we were able to, in our callback, apply a filter, a user filter to the grid. Now you can also specify a base filter as well using the same syntax, and the difference of course between a user filter and a base filter is that the base filter cannot be removed by the user, whereas the user filter can be removed. So when the base filter is applied, any filtering that the user does when interacting with the grid is going to be in addition to the base filter. So now let's go and comment out these lines over here, and then now comment in our link definition here. So let's go now and type in the link definition. So now what we're doing is we're saying that this grid is linked on the bill state region field with a value of Massachusetts. So that means that the grid will be filtered on Massachusetts, but also that any new records that are entered will also have the bill state region field automatically set to Massachusetts. So let's go now and run this. And so now we can see that the grid is only showing records in Massachusetts, but also that the new record rows are going to automatically have their bill state region value set to Massachusetts. So we've just shown now how you can basically link this grid as opposed to filter the grid. And the link can be of course on more than one field. So if we comment this line out now and comment in these two lines, we can see that now we've defined a link on two fields, on first name and last name, and we've said that the first name is Kathy and the last name is Height. So if we go now to our grid, to our component and run it, we can see that now we're filtering on Kathy Height, but also all the new records have a value of Kathy Height in the first name and last name fields. So what we've shown over here is how this the generic A5 runGridComponent function can be enhanced by supplying a user filter, a base filter, arguments, or a link definition to control exactly which records are displayed in the grid component. And of course you can specify any additional properties in the override settings in the p.override. Thanks very much for watching.